Welcome to Wayward Writers. I'm senior literary agent and author Heather Cashman.
I'm author and writing coach Stephanie Bearce.
And I'm author and writing coach Nicki Jacobsmeyer.
Our mission is to nurture and enrich established writers throughout their publishing journeys.
We welcome all genres, age groups, and publishing paths through video podcasts, online webinars, in-person retreats, and more.
We're here to help you conquer your path.
We are happy to be with you today. We have received a number of questions on social media and also email about the process of me going through queries. So I am going to turn this over to Nicki and Stephanie so that they can...
Oh, we're going to grill you.
Away.
We're going to grill you, Heather.
For our audience, we'll be the bad guys and grill and ask the tough questions. And just like anything, obviously, this is Heather's opinion. This is the way she does it. This is us asking. So, this isn't across the board for all agents. So, keep
very much my
own
process.
Yeah, keep an open mind about that. But I think, the bottom line is we want to write a query that agents want to request a full and then want to offer representation. I mean, that's the bottom line. So, Stephanie, let's grill.
Yeah, okay. Heather, let's start out with just general information. What are the key elements that you look for in a query letter?
So the first thing I look for is someone addressing me by my name, which doesn't happen all the time, believe it or not. People have a tendency to say dear agent or dear quotation S agents. I do this too. Like sometimes I have copied and pasted in the wrong name or something like that. And so if people get the wrong name, I get it. I've done that before. I used to call my kids my dog's name, so all's forgiven on that account.
Happens.
But the second thing would be, do you know who I am? Have you seen me somewhere? Have you met me somewhere? Have you listened to a podcast? Have you looked at my manuscript wish list? Or have you gone to my website? And it doesn't have to be much. It just has to be a little bit. And there have been times when I've also gotten too much personalization.
Yes. What does too much mean?
Maybe you mentioned multiple things, or you mentioned something that I have said on social media, which I don't do this a lot now anymore because of this very reason. But for agents across the board, if they're talking about something personal, if they're talking about their families, if they're talking about their husbands or their children or where they went on vacation, those are things that are from their personal life that I would not mention. I would keep this kind of distinct line drawn between the professional and the personal. And so for me, my podcast is professional, my website is professional, but if I'm talking about my kids, don't mention my kids in your query. That feels a little bit too personal and stalkerish.
Yeah. No being a stalker. That does not help.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a fine line too,
Sure.
I feel. And I know most people doing it, they don't have bad intentions at all. They're just trying to make a connection. And I respect that, but it can feel a little bit weird and invasive.
But I think if the connection can be made right on a professional level,
Absolutely.
Listen to a podcast of interest and then say why you agree with Heather. Don't talk about our pets and stuff. If you are second guessing it, don't do it. And if you aren't second guessing anything, then that probably means you haven't put it through your critique group. So you need someone else looking at that query just like you do your manuscript. Yeah. And if it feels off, it's not worth that in the end.
Yeah. So what else do you know? You want your name and to have an indication that they do know who you are and just not going down the list.
I'm not just the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
And then because I feel like when you're sending me a query letter, you are trying to essentially instigate a professional relationship with me. And that's a contractual relationship. So it's a business relationship. So the other thing I'm looking for is professionalism. I'm looking for the letter to be professional. I'm looking for you to have done your research to know what a query letter is. Like, for instance, I personally prefer that after the personalization, you have a title paragraph where you're telling me the genre and the age category and the title of the book and maybe a log line. But if you put that underneath the pitch, it's not going to make a difference as to whether I read the query or not. It's just my personal preference. But something like that is not a big deal because I know that other agents like it that way and we're all short on time. So if you're sending everyone the same format, little things like that to me don't matter. I think it's more just, do you have all the pieces there? And are you putting it in a professional way in a business letter format? And just briefly, all the pieces would be the name, the personalization, a title paragraph, a pitch of the actual manuscript that does not pitch too much. We're talking about like a jacket flap copy, like a blurb that you would read on Amazon that will create curiosity and interest. And then a paragraph with comparable titles, or that could also be comp titles, could be in your title paragraph. And then the last thing is a professional bio, like biography of you, highlighting any writing credits that you have, and also just giving any information that lets me know why you feel you're the best person to be writing this book. Or maybe why the premise really resonates with you, or anything like that. And then, what do you do for a day job? If you want to put that, that's great. And things like that. And then close. And in your signature, I would hope that you would include your information. Like, at least show me, I ask for this in my query manager, but if you're not doing a query manager, I would suggest adding into your signature places where they can find you on social media. Do you have a website? Are you affiliated with organizations or things like that? Another thing you can also add into your bio is a little bit of marketing information. For instance, if you are writing a nonfiction that has to do with conservation and you belong to a conservation organization, I would include that in your bio, but not too much. Like, you don't want to list everything because then it'll be in your platform and your proposal. But the same thing for fiction. Like, if your main character is a nurse and you're a nurse, that's relevant information because then I'm going to know that your perspective is more authentic, right? And it's going to make me more excited to read it.
So anything relevant to your writing. Well, what are some like either common mistakes or personal pet peeves that turn you off and you stop reading?
I would say common mistakes are not having that format correct, or not having any kind of real professional format. Just not following instructions. We were supposed to learn instructions in grade school. I don't think a lot of us ever did. And honestly, that is something that's a big turnoff for me, because when you are working with a publisher or you are working with any kind of editor or illustrator, there are going to be instructions you need to follow. And if you can't follow them, there's going to be all kinds of trouble. So that's kind of a warning of a possible future headache. Also, just not even really checking for punctuation or grammar, spelling. Obviously, a few or one or two is fine, but there are definitely times when I see many errors.
Run it through Grammarly. It's not hard.
Yeah, I mean, if
They
you're going to
have
be
a
a
free
professional
version.
writer, you really should just learn how to punctuate things. I'll tell you another thing that people do is, I don't mind if people nudge, and I am totally supportive of nudging because I feel like it does help everyone's mental health when you know that you can nudge and it's safe to nudge and the agent is not going to judge you for nudging. And I think that's really important. There are times, though, that when people nudge, they're very negative or they're very critical of how long I've taken. And for me, that is an automatic rejection because I state very clearly that it might take me 6 months to get to your query. And I mean, we can get into the whys of that if you want, but that's just the reality of my situation right now. And so, tone and the way you approach an agent in every email and message that you send them is important. You're building a relationship from the very beginning. So
it takes 6 months, right? That seems like for maybe the author a really long time.
yeah,
However, maybe people don't have the knowledge or understanding of why it takes that long for not only you but many agents and longer for that matter. Can you kind of speak to that and
hmm
why, while a writer or illustrator, but while a writer's looking for an agent, when the agent is giving a length of time, it's a positive thing for them as a potential client, right? Like, why does it take 6 months? If I guess let's start there.
yeah,
What is a taste of what you do day in and day out? That
okay,
Hold on to your
I mean,
hats, audience. It's a
that's
lot.
probably
It's a lot.
another episode,
Yeah.
but I think sometimes it's easy for us to forget as writers when we're refreshing our inbox, you know.
right. So, just briefly, a day in the life of an agent could be its own podcast. For a brand new agent, I was able to just dive into my query inbox all the time, and that's where I spent most of my time. And my first 2 years of being an agent, I would just go run through my query inbox, and I loved it. Um, and I was able to just take on clients and was very open. And so I wasn't nearly as busy. Once you begin to have clients who are more successful, there's a lot more that you're doing every day that is nothing to do with queries. My day consists of emails, setting up meetings with editors and clients, negotiating offers, negotiating contracts, editing my client manuscripts, more emails, and more emails and more emails, creating sub packages, putting things on submission, making sure that I'm nudging editors who have submissions. I am calculating royalties. I am looking at sub rights. I am making sure things are getting announced. There is so much minutia that happens in publishing with a single project. And then you also are working with making sure that your clients whose books is in production, are we on schedule? Do we have an illustrator for this project? Are we getting the marketing from sales and marketing people at the publisher? Is my client being taken care of? I could go on and on and on. There is like loads of stuff that I do every day, and it's different every day.
Maybe
So,
one of the thing I get one thing, it sounds like it's really, really I just in talking with you, I know your day is always full. Could you what percentage of your time do you think you're actually able to dedicate to your query inbox?
so the only time I get to go do queries is at night
Mhm.
on my own time.
Okay. So
I
that's
don't have
so if you want any sleep at all, there's not a lot of time for the queries, and that might be why it takes 6 months to be able to get back to someone. I guess I'm just saying
right.
to encourage
So,
patience for those who are querying. It's not that Heather doesn't want to read it. It does not that that agent doesn't want to read. It's just there's a lot of
yeah.
balls in the air.
Mhm.
Yeah. And, people will say, oh, well, obviously, if you have that much to do during your day, you don't have time to take me on as a client. And the reality is, if I don't keep taking on clients, I will not sell things
Yeah.
Mhm.
because while I do have authors that consistently produce manuscripts I can sell and do sell, at least half my authors produce manuscripts I can never sell or manuscripts that I've sold the first one, but I can't get a second sale. And this is a hard thing to face as an author if you have an agent, or if you're just subbing and publishing your own manuscript. A lot of times you have one amazing idea, but it's really, really hard to continue coming up with amazing ideas that fit in the market. The reality is, over time, if 3, 4, 5, 6 years pass and I've subbed 3, 4, 5 manuscripts out there to editors, and me and the client are just not working, like to sell something, there might be a conversation there where we decide to part ways, and then I have an opening in my list. So that happens. And also there's an ebb and flow too. Sometimes I do have days where I might have a free Friday and I just dive into my query inbox all day long. And so publishing is very much on this kind of ebb and flow schedule, where we have seasons where things go out and we have seasons where they're acquiring a lot more than December, where we all collapse. So
You were talking a little bit about on, you know, on the queries and about the ebb and flow and the different things. What are some of the titles and things that you're looking for right now, or that you're seeing sell? What are you going to be excited to see in your query box? And I know sometimes you just don't even know, because some things can be so surprising and exciting that you can't imagine it. But of those things that you can imagine, what are some of the things you're kind of looking for, you think the market's ready for right now?
So the one thing I do look for is something that surprises me. Because 5 years ago, romantasy wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
5 years before that, dark academia wasn't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Once upon a time, dystopian wasn't a thing. And what I would love to see is that, what is it that is that next trendsetter, right? What is it that's going to create an entire subgenre of its
Yeah.
own, or just going to open up a new perspective or category? I think that is what the thing I'm looking for the most. Obviously romantasy is here to stay, and I love fantasy. I love fantasy with B-plot romance, and it's selling, but it has to be really original at this point, because the fantasy has been selling so well for so long now. I think that eventually, maybe sometime this year or next year, we're going to start seeing contemporary come back. It's not ever completely left, and it never will, but I do think it was slowing down. Like, even in just imprints that normally only take contemporary, like they were even asking, it needs a little magical realism, or it needs a little bit of speculative something in it. And what I really love and what I really think is selling well right now is anything in the children's space that feels like an upmarket adult. I don't know why they don't use the word upmarket in the children's space, but that's the thing I'm looking for. It's like that. It always seems to sell well when you have an idea and hooks that are commercial and different and unique, with like a literary type of voice that's not too literary that it's hard to read, but it has those moments in it where you just feel like your mind has been opened to a new concept. Or there's like catchphrases that end up becoming really big, and things like that. I think those are the kind of manuscripts I look for. I always look for things that are empowering. Humor is always a good sell. Everybody needs a little humor. Even if it's something that's like an issue book, you've got to break it up with a little bit of lightness. And also things just like, we need to laugh.
Yeah.
Because we've all had a really hard year.
And it's only 14 days in for us.
How do you tackle your query inbox? Maybe you should share, like, how many do you go by chronological date, or?
So last year I opened up in February and I didn't close until October. On the very first day I opened, I got over 500 queries.
Wow.
And by the time I was like a month in, I had 3,000 queries in my inbox.
Wow.
Now, I rejected anywhere from probably 1,000 to 2,000 queries every single month. And I still, when I closed in October, I had over 3,500 queries in my inbox. And I actually have a question on my query form that says, if I can't get to your query in 6 months, do you want that non-answer to be a hard no? Or do you want me to keep it under consideration? And I honor that. If they want a hard no, then that's a hard no for me. And I won't even look at their query after that, because I feel like now they've stated they don't want me to look at it. And maybe they've moved on, and I want to respect that, because maybe they've moved on to another agent at my agency. And I want to respect that they're now with that agent. And so that's something that I think, if you want to be conscious of the individual author, which I do, you have to sometimes just realize that you have a bandwidth, and sometimes the influx that you get is going to exceed your bandwidth, and there's nothing you can do about it. It took me a long time to really get to the point where I could say, I just can't do it all. And that was difficult for me. But I feel like that question gives me a way to do that. It gives me a way to give authors the choice of what they want most. And then I respect that. And then also, you're combating. So right now I have 1,576 queries in my inbox. So in just the last week, I have received 7 people who have gotten offers of representation or publication. So that happens just about every week in my query inbox. I mean, sometimes I only get 3, sometimes I get 10. Again, it's like an ebb and flow. And there are seasons when there's a lot of people taking on clients, and then seasons where it's slower. And so I have to look at those first, right?
Sure.
Like if you come with an offer and you're in my inbox, I need to tell that author, okay, I am going to look at your query, and maybe right off the bat, I know it's not for me or for my list. Or maybe it sounds really great and I would really love to read it. So then there's this evaluation process that goes on with those queries that come in. And then there is this evaluation process after that going on with, okay, I've read these queries and I've requested these books, and now I need to read these submissions. So I'm reading at least 3 books a week. And we're talking about full-length novels. That doesn't include all the picture books I read. So, and I'm doing that at night because, again, like I don't really have time during the day. I think that's pretty much like the limit of it. At that point, then I'm just sifting and I'm sorting. And I'm sifting and sorting depending on, for instance, let's say I just took on an adult contemporary romance. Well, then my priority is not going to be adult contemporary romance, because I need to get that author edited. I need to get them on submission before I even consider another adult contemporary romance author. And say now I have 3 or 4 adult contemporary romance authors on my list, then I'm going to start really closing down to those unless they are just absolutely outstanding premises. So sometimes I'll take and I will I'll filter my queries, and I'll say, okay, these are all the adult romance contemporaries that I have on my list. I'm going to be really, really, really nitpicky, and I'm only going to request the freshest ideas, the unique premises, the really voicey writing, and a good synopsis. So then I may reject a whole bunch of contemporary romances at one time, because these are the 5 that stand out, and my list is already pretty full of those. So don't always go in order. but I do try.
That makes sense.
It's a lot.
It is. As a matter of fact, I did a little math, and if you have 3,000 queries in and you give each one just 5 minutes, that's 15,000 minutes, and that equals 250 hours of query reading
For how many queries?
for 3,000. If you just give them
Oh, yeah.
5 minutes,
They don't get 5
I'm sure they
minutes.
don't, but others get longer. So if your average is 5 minutes, that's
Yeah.
250 hours of query reading.
It's a lot
That's
of query
huge.
reading.
That's huge.
Yeah. And I do it at night.
Just math-wise,
There are
it's a
times,
lot.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
And that's
that is all work I don't get paid for.
Yeah.
Like there is absolutely,
Yeah.
I mean, I might get a new client, but then really the work on that client happens through submissions and editing and all of that, which I also don't get paid for unless it sells.
Right.
So yeah, it's a lot of unpaid labor.
Yes, it is.
well, and I think when you're querying agents, you wonder why it's taking so long. And then once you have an agent, your focus kind of switches. And I remember when I was at a conference, this agent said, "It is not fair to my clients for me to spend the majority of my time reading your queries." And it stung for a little bit, right? And then I was like, right, but if and when I get an agent, would I want my agent not spending time on me and my sister and brother clients because of query? Like, that's not how it works, right? Like, agents, editors, we all have to divide our time between our hats, and some of them take more priority. So I think when you go in it with that expectation, that is helpful for you, I think, as a writer to understand that it does take time. So,
Yeah.
Heather, can you share some like success stories or some examples of queries that just you were like, if only everyone could write a query like this, or show this kindness, or anything like that?
Okay, I'll give you an example without having to name people. So one of my clients, she had queried me in my query inbox, and I had loved the premise of her book. Absolutely loved it. And it was very different. It was a picture book. It was nonfiction, but it was lyrical and it was beautiful. And I could just imagine these illustrations. But it was going to require so much work and I just was at a point when I couldn't do it. But I gave her a lot of feedback. And I was like, if you revise this or you have other stuff to send me, I would love to stay in contact. Well, about 6 months after that, or 8 months after that, she had been at conferences and getting critiques on it by editors. And she had really elevated it. I mean, really, really elevated it. And it was beautiful. And she requeried me and I took her on and the reason was because she had taken my advice. She had been so proactive. I could tell she was doing everything she could to get her craft going and improve. And she'd been investing in her career as an author. And that really impressed me. And I didn't think that she did give me some other manuscripts and they weren't as strong, but they were still really good. And I felt like we could make a go of it. And so I ended up offering. And she was just very kind, very professional. She knew who I was. She had gone to all the SCBWI things that I had written online, or like my bio, and she'd gone to my website and all that, and she knew who I was. And she said because I was the one that gave her that feedback and really, really pushed her to make it into something that was marketable, she went with me. And like I have one client, I'm honestly not even sure I read their query letter. Like I literally don't even know if I ever read their query letter. I got a notice before I had ever requested the full that they had an offer. And I probably read maybe the first paragraph of the pitch, and the premise was so unique and so compelling that I just requested the manuscript. And that very day, I turned it into an audio file and I listened to it. And I like, it needed all this work. I was like, oh my gosh, this needs so much work. But the premise was so unique. I didn't have anything on my list like it. I didn't have anything in the age category of that manuscript at the time. And so I started writing all these notes of like edit letters, and I called the person. Still, I hadn't even read their bio, and called them, set up a call. So, like that query letter, it could have been trash. But the fact they like they said, "Dear Heather," and they told me this amazing premise, and then the manuscript delivered. I mean, I know we work really hard on our queries.
I think that's a fantastic lesson and a takeaway for
Mhm.
all of us that yes, we don't want to get the wrong name on the query letter or query somebody
Yeah,
who's closed or anything, but it's really
yeah,
about your story and how much work
mhm,
have you put into that. And again, and then also like your other example, how much work are you willing to put in? How much
Mhm.
work are you
yes,
willing to do to become the published author? And so
right.
those are, I think that's real encouragement that it's not just the query letter, it's the whole package of you.
Mhm.
It is the whole package. It really is. It's every interaction that you have. I mean, I had another client who I read their first book and I really liked it. And I thought the premise was really unique and I loved the fantasy sci fi element of it. But then it needed so much work that I was like, hey, do you have anything else? What else do you have
Hmm.
that I could look at? And the client had another manuscript that was their most recent manuscript. It hadn't been edited quite as much as the other one, but between the two, this client made a huge leap in the ability of their writing. It was like they just found their voice.
Yeah.
They found themselves. And I loved that manuscript. And I offered on that manuscript that didn't even have a query letter. Like it didn't even have a pitch.
Mhm.
It didn't even have comps, but I fell in love with that manuscript and I offered on that. So it really is every interaction. And again, sometimes your query letter is the thing that the agent locks onto and says, "Oh my goodness, this person is they're trying so hard. Look at their bio. They're investing in professional edits or they're investing in their time in going to all these workshops or critique groups or whatever it is that you're involved in. And that can make a difference. It definitely sways me.
Mhm.
So,
That's just so important that it is the whole author. It's a relationship,
mhm.
it's a business partnership, but business
Yeah.
partnerships are also about professionalism and kindness and looking out for each
Mhm.
other. And I think that comes across in what
Definitely.
you're looking for in your query letter and in your clients.
It's interesting you say that because even after you become a client, I had a client meeting this morning and don't pity me or anything, but like I have been having some issues with breathing and they're trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And my client this morning, he said, "You just tell me." He's like, "If you need a month, you tell me. I need a month because I have to figure out what's wrong with me and I need to rest and I need a break." And he's like, "I will be fine with that. You just have to communicate that to me." What an amazing thing to say to me. I cannot tell you. I started almost crying
Oh.
because of the relief I
Yeah.
felt because I feel such obligation to my clients. And so if you can be that kind of client, if you can be that kind of person and have that kind of understanding from the get-go, those boundaries go both ways. The next time if he needs a break and he's like, "Heather, I have to take 2 weeks or I'm going to collapse and my creativity is going down the drain." I'm going to be fine with that. We're
Mhm.
going to work it
Yeah.
out.
I think that's amazing. And I think we've discussed this before, but Stephanie and I both been regional advisors with SEBWI and other adult organizations and stuff like that. And whenever we ask the question, because everyone wants to know, I want to know too, what is the number one quality you look for in a creator? And the first thing is kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is craft. So, like, you can go
Yeah.
be kind all day long, but if you can't write, in the end, it's not going to be great as far as being acquired. But we're human, right? And this is
Yeah.
living, active
Mm-hmm.
relationship. And I think sometimes people too, if things don't go the way they want, they don't stay away from social media or like you've had a bad experience, the worst thing you could do, career suicide, would be to share that bad experience
Nope.
with other
Nope.
people. Don't do it unless you do not want to continue in publishing because everyone knows everyone in publishing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big industry, but it's super small. And the bottom line is, it's not attractive seeing someone rip someone a new like that. No one has time for that. It's hard enough when everyone is working together, right? I mean, that's why we're here
Yeah.
to try to conquer our paths together. So,
And help and lift one another.
yeah.
I also wonder sometimes if people look at me and say, oh, she runs a podcast, she must have extra time. Or like, why is she spending time on her podcast rather than on my query? And I just want to answer that question
No, I
really
think
quickly
that's
because I
great.
do think it's a valid thought. But the reality is, there are ways that we fill our cup. And this podcast is the way that I fill my cup.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't fill my cup, I mean, I was getting to a point a couple of years ago when I wasn't filling my cup and my cup was empty and I was almost ready to quit agenting. And if I hadn't started this podcast and started having a way to learn for myself in a way that I could manage it and also connect with industry professionals and conquer my own path, that's what I'm doing here.
Yes.
I would not be able to go and help anybody else conquer their path. I would not be able to sustain what I am doing as an agent if I wasn't filling my cup and conquering my path. So I just wanted to take a moment and just address that because I do think it's a valid question.
And we're here.
Well,
We're happy you are filling your cup
mhm.
and helping all of us conquer your path. And I do think that's important because you're going to be able to help more people by giving information on the podcast. And we hope our listeners understand that it's a gift, but it also fills us up, each one of us, to
Mhm.
do the podcast too.
It really does.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go on a limb and say if you are listening or watching a agent do a podcast or be at a conference or anything like that, and your thought is they should be in their query box and not doing that, you should not be querying that agent or maybe any agent
Anybody?
at that time because that agent sees it as important giving back to the community as well to their clients, their non-clients, potential clients, and themselves. And if that frustrates you, I
Right.
would say that most likely it's not going to be a great relationship because you have different objectives.
Yes.
Um, so, and
Yeah,
that's okay. Like that's you need to know what it is
absolutely.
you want and what it is you don't want.
Mhm.
And like that's good. Know yourself.
Yes.
But as two people that know Heather as a friend, as a co-host, and as clients, there is no one that works harder than Heather. And there's a lot of agents
Mhm.
out there that are the same way. So
Thank
we
you.
hope that I know that I keep showing up because I keep learning stuff from you guys and our guests,
Yes.
and it's wonderful. And that was our goal, from the get go, is that so we can all fill each other's cup. We can be here for the wins, for the lows. That's what a community is. So we hope that this has given you maybe a new perspective, or maybe answered some questions that, you've been wanting to ask, and Stephanie and I got to grill Heather on. But regardless, we're grateful that you're here. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Wayward Writers.
Let's connect. Find us at waywardwriters.com, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
See you next time. Conquer your path.